Hey guys, today we are going to kind of go over what we would like you to have for your initial conflict paragraphs in your narrative essays. So at this point, you should have your setting paragraphs, those first two paragraphs in our narrative kind of set up and written. We focused on where our character, our passenger is at in the ship prior to the collision, and we used a lot of description, kind of describing what that looked like, and also setting up the character and who they are as a person. But now we should be in our third paragraph of the essay, and now we want to focus on that initial conflict, which of course is the collision of the Titanic into the iceberg. And in this paragraph, we're really going to work on sensory details. Okay, so like I said, this is going to be one paragraph long. Some of the sensory details that we want to look at are sounds. So what did this sound like? Depending on where your character is at, it's going to be different. So first class characters, they're not going to hear much, maybe just a slight, bang when it hits the iceberg. But for the most part, because they were so high up on the ship, they didn't really hear much. Versus a third class passenger, they hear a nice long scraping sound. So it's going to be different. So you want to make sure that you are accurate with how you describe what the collision sounds like based on where your character's at. Also, we want to work on what it looked like. So depending on where they're at, if they're a first class passenger in the dining room, maybe they are watching, the silverware and the plates kind of shake a bit, and you can, of course, hear that. If they're in the room, maybe, they have a glass of water next to their bed and they see the water kind of rippling, or maybe they see some of the paintings on their walls kind of shift a little bit. But first class, they're not going to see evidence of the collision as much. It's going to be very, very small and hard to make out. Versus third class, maybe they see their light flickering a whole bunch because, it's affecting the engines and the electricity that's running into their room. Maybe they see people, their roommates in their room fall out of their beds, luggage toppling over, things like that. They're going to see it's going to be a lot different for them because they're in third, which is below deck, way below deck, which is right next to where the iceberg hits. So they're going to feel it a lot more and they're going to see something a lot more drastic happen. Same thing with feelings, again, in first class, maybe they felt just like a slight nudge or a bump in the night versus third class. If they're falling out of their bed, obviously they're going to feel, kind of an intense shaking to the point where they can fall out of bed, or some of the roommates may fall out of bed. The feeling is going to be a lot different. Even smell, you can incorporate that in any way that you want. Ultimately, probably third class might even smell like the engines kind of halting. Maybe there's that mechanical smell. In this paragraph, it's a great opportunity to use figurative language. So comparing these sensory details to other things like similes or metaphors, or if you want to, describe something and emphasize it a lot, you could use hyperbole. So, a great simile, maybe in first class, I watched the painting on the wall kind of shake like a leaf versus, something in third class, it was shaking so violently it felt like an earthquake. Those would be kind of some good similes to use in describing and comparing what those sensory details felt like. And again, we want to make sure that we are as historically accurate as possible. So really take into consideration where your character is at, and how that would impact how you describe the collision. We are going to watch a quick clip from the film Titanic. This clip does a great job of showing multiple locations. It shows, the crew members, where they're at. It shows first class cabins and dining rooms. It shows third class cabins out on the deck itself, right next to the iceberg. Any of those locations, it really does a good job of showing exactly what it looked like, what it sounded like, all of those sensory details. So you guys can go ahead and watch this. It's just a couple of minutes and really take note as to those sensory details, because we will be practicing kind of what those were like in different locations on the ship afterwards. All right, so now that you have watched that clip, we are going to practice kind of making sure that we're historically accurate for different locations. So the first one I'm going to do for you, so you can write this down on your worksheet. So our first example would be a first class passenger in their room. And this is the example that we put in there. So I felt a slight vibration like a bumpy carriage ride. So again, we're being historically accurate here. They would have felt a slight vibration, but we've also used some figurative language here. So we've compared it to, what it would have felt like in a carriage ride back then. The glass of water in the nightstand next to me shook, and the liquid sloshed about. The painting on the wall shifted slightly to the left. The pocket watch on the dresser clattered to the floor. So again, we've got lots of description. Again, this person's in their cabin, so we want to see some of what is happening inside the room. All right, so your next one you guys are going to do on your own. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to write down just, again, some description, those sensory details. You want to focus on those. Just write down what the collision would have felt like for a passenger out on the deck by the iceberg. And again, you can take into account the film and what we saw there. So take a couple minutes and write out a description of what that would have felt like for that person, or looked like or sounded like, and then you can share that with the class. Another location, so now we want to work on a third class passenger in their room. So again, take a couple of minutes. Again, really think about sensory details for a third class passenger. You saw in the film clip what it would have been like for a third class passenger. So take all those sensory details and describe what that would be like. All right, and the last example or location that we're going to use is a passenger in the first class dining room. So again, take into consideration what that sounded like, looked like, felt like, sounded like, any of those sensory details. What was that like if you were in the dining room? And again, think of the clip and what we saw there. So take a couple minutes and practice describing that. All right, so now that you have practiced all of those locations, we want you to focus, of course, on where your passenger is at. So again, think of their class and location, cabin or elsewhere, and really look over your planning sheet. If you haven't really thought of those sensory details, now is the time to do it. But you want to go ahead and start typing this third paragraph and really make sure that you focus on what it was like for them during the collision.